Welcome to Assessor's Map 5.A and Parcel 14, also referred to as the Taggart property. The town of Bolton has placed the acquisition of this property on the town warrant, but due to COVID-19 and Governor Baker's current stay-at-home order, we're unable to host large visits to the property. All site visits must be authorized and individuals must be accompanied by either the town administrator or the conservation administrator. Instead, we're adapting to these limitations and providing a virtual tour of the property in hopes of providing further insight into the importance of acquiring this property for the town. Henry David Thoreau once stated in his essay titled Walking, "I think that I cannot preserve my health and spirits unless I spend 4 hours a day at least, and it is commonly more than that, sauntering through the woods and over the hills and fields, absolutely free from all worldly engagements." As we enter into the Taggart property up the relatively steep slope of over 100 feet of frontage along Forbush Mill Road, we can look to our right and observe the wetland resource area within the adjacent conservation parcels. These continue along Forbush Mill Road, down the weaving perennial stream, across the transfer station, over the remnants of a historic mill, and down to Forbush Mill Fields, emptying into the area of critical environmental concern, where the stream eventually meets the Nashua River. To our left, you'll note the adjacent property with an address of 40 Forbush Mill Road. There was some mining carried out previously, which you can observe as we progress into the property, explaining the irregular topography. As we travel further into the property along a cart path utilized for testing and mining purposes, we approach a pond along the east property line that feeds a brook continuing along Forbush Mill Road. Traveling south further along the rear of the property, we find ourselves on the Lancaster Railroad bed, retired many years ago. The Lancaster Railroad is an interesting historical moment. A section of the single-track railroad that ran southwest from Lancaster to Hudson forms a 600-foot portion on the south boundary of the property. After being built, only one train ever ran over its tracks and it never opened to the public. The Lancaster and Hudson Railroad were chartered on April 30th, 1870. From the start, the railroad was beset by financial and managerial problems. Its purpose was to run from South Lancaster through Bolton and on to Hudson. It was presumed that at the time of railroad fever, the citizens of Bolton were interested in improving transportation. Construction of the 8 3/4 mile track was completed in 1872. Soon after, one train was run in 1873 to allow officials to look things over. Neither of the connecting railroads would ever exercise their lease agreement, and a lawsuit eventually led to bankruptcy in 1874. Because of this, the railroad was never to officially open. In 1889, the rails were taken up 113 years ago. From the Central Mass, the Boston and Maine Railroad Historical Society, 2009. After walking along the old rail bed, we find ourselves just to the south of a kettle hole that houses an active vernal pool within its deepest depths. As we climb down the kettle hole wall, we can observe signs of wildlife, minimal understory growth, and the dominant canopy of large diameter trees. Here at its lowest point, we observe a small pool which persists to allow for amphibians breeding, from wood frogs to spotted salamanders, fairy shrimp, and more. As we exit the kettle hole again, we notice traces of wildlife throughout. Along the western border of the property, one can observe the adjacent state property managed by DCAMM that doesn't allow for public access and contains a large body of ponded water. This area is also used by a population of active beavers. It's interesting to observe that the beaver activity extends uphill and into the very edge of the Taggart property, where you can find markings from their teeth on the base of a stump or a tree that was recently harvested. As we continue towards the northern border of the property, we once again can observe and hear the sound of the stream that runs from Forbush Mill Road through another conservation parcel. Before heading to the frontage of this property, let's look at the heart of this parcel and its ecological and anthropogenic importance within its landscape. In our current emergency stay-at-home order, many of Bolton's residents are lucky enough to have an extended backyard within walking distance of their homes, our conservation properties. Residents are able to conduct passive recreational activities such as exploring, running, walking, horseback riding, and mountain biking. Conservation professionals and land trusts throughout the state have noticed dramatic increases in the use of open spaces and conservation properties during the current pandemic. Some wildlife refuges and sanctuaries have closed their facilities very recently due to personnel staying at home. However, residents within walking distance and other community members are finding their way to these areas where it can be used for exercise, mental well-being, or just simply some fresh air and change of scenery. The acquisition of this 43-acre parcel, located off Forbush Mill Road, offers the potential for both conservation land and land banking for a municipal structure, used to be determined at a later date. The property is currently in the Chapter 61 program with a 10-year, long-term forestry management plan. This property is unique in that it's an upland parcel containing old logging cart paths, a vernal pool within a kettle pond, unique forest vegetation, the Lancaster Railroad, and a wetlands along its perimeter. The Bolton Master Plan will inevitably indicate the need for additional municipal facilities. Use of the land for municipal structures would involve engineering plans and assessments to develop access from Forbush Mill Road, which involves a perennial stream, cold water fishery riparian area, floodplain, bordering vegetated wetlands, adjacent upland resource area, and a steep grade into the property adjacent to the road. The majority of the property would be conserved for forested open space and public access. It's also important to protect this area to assist in watershed management when we have high-velocity storms and changes in precipitation, which we now face more frequently. Drought and floods impact Still River tributaries flowing along Forbush Mill Road. This area has a history of flooding. The more vegetated surfaces, sandy soils resulting in good drainage that we can keep intact, the more water infiltrates naturally on-site prior to reaching the right-of-way or the river itself, thereby reducing runoff, erosion damage, and impact from floodwaters overwhelming older stormwater structures. Forbush Mill Road has not only experienced historic flooding of the roadway, but also within recent years has experienced a loss of or damage to stormwater infrastructure. There are 4 culverts along Still River tributary and Forbush Mill Road, 2 of which have been impacted and temporarily repaired. This is a cost to the town of an estimated $300,000, each crossing based on past culvert repairs over perennial streams utilizing the required box culvert replacements. The preservation of this land may lengthen the life of the culverts still impacted by handling stormwater on site, as it does in its current forested state. The topography of the land assists in this as well, as it's not a level parcel in many areas, which allows for temporary pooling to occur, acting as a natural retention basin prior to the infiltration during storms of heavy precipitation. The water flows, filters, slows, and infiltrates on site. The 43-acre forested landscape absorbs stormwaters before they ever reach the roadway or stormwater infrastructure. There are potential wetland resource areas on site, including a vernal pool within the deepest part of the kettle pond. This vernal pool has been observed to be actively used by wood frogs and spotted salamanders for breeding. Additionally, fairy shrimp, beetles, damselflies, and deer utilize this resource area. Water resources are arranged around the perimeter of the property, including 2 freshwater ponds, feeding the cold water fisheries, freshwater forested shrub wetlands, floodplain associated with the perennial stream, riverfront areas, and in the midst of the property adjacent to the vernal pool and at the base of the kettle pond, there is a freshwater emergent wetland. Healthy, continuous forested areas provide vital ecology services to the community. These services are perceived as free benefits to the community, equivalent with the term public goods. These ecological services include wildlife habitat and diversity, watershed services, carbon storage, carbon sequestration in the soils and forested vegetation, and scenic landscapes. By utilizing the data viewer, provided through our Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness program, you can observe that it's important to note that these goods and services are not included within a community's check and balance sheet traditionally. Their contributions are frequently overlooked in decision-making across the broad range of sectors. As forests become undervalued, they are at risk for development pressures, re-establishing the fact that forest ecosystems are natural assets with economic and social value can assist in the promotion of conservation and responsible decision-making. The Taggart parcel has been identified as a significant and priority parcel for the last 15 years. The Town of Bolton Open Space and Recreation Plan updates from 2005 to present established that the area between Wilder Road and Forbush Mill Road as an area of significance to the town, based on the white pine forests and large areas of unusual vegetation communities within the framework of the mixed deciduous forest and specific to the hemlock strands along Forbush Mill Road. The cultural and historic significance between Forbush Mill Road and Wilder Road. This was cited in the Shrewsbury Ridge Report as being of prime scenic importance, in addition to the two old dam sites existing as remains of water-powered mills of colonial Bolton. This property was listed as a priority in the 2005 OSRP. Major scenic interest, prime agricultural soils, historic landmarks, and a source of Forbush Mill Brook / Still River tributary. The important objective of protecting major wetland buffer acquisitions and protection of land near aquifers are top priority for protecting water resources. Areas of town that would fit into this priority include aquifer recharge areas on the eastern and western borders of town and the major hydrologic corridors in town, notably the Great Brook, Mill Brook, and the Forbush Mill systems. The Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, put in place by the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, encourages nature-based solutions. Due to the historic flooding of the adjacent area, it would be encouraged to seek ways that will reduce stress on the right-of-way and stormwater infrastructure. This project would be utilizing natural resources and pervious surfaces to manage inland flooding, erosion, and other storm damage. The town retaining the property as a forested parcel will reduce ambient temperatures, provide shade, increase evaporation, improve local air quality, and otherwise provide cooling services within the municipality. This would be a nature-based storm damage protection, drought mitigation, water quality, and water infiltration technique. It would also address impacts of climate change such as extreme weather, damaging wind, and power outages by acting as a barrier. This would achieve a resiliency objective and provide natural flood storage to reduce downstream flooding. In this case, it also reduces flooding that would have adverse impacts to the resource areas, historical structures, and the area of critical environmental concern at the outlet of the Coldwater fishery. That concludes our tour of the Taggart property. If you'd like more information, visit